My mother-in-law's harsh words cut through me like a knife. In the kitchen of her diner, hidden away from the customers, she screamed that women who can't bear children shouldn't have a voice. With a cane in hand, her anger turned physical, striking my stomach with a thud that sent waves of pain through my body. I looked to my husband for help, but he averted his eyes, leaving me feeling abandoned in my time of need. Desperate to secure a future for her business, my mother-in-law's attitude toward me grew more hostile over time. Her relentless harassment escalated to daily violence. As I lay there, hand outstretched toward my husband, the sting of his indifference was as painful as the physical blow I had just endured. "You're a useless piece of trash," she spat, her words dripping with contempt. "Go back to where you came from. You're defective." Nodding in resignation, I remained on the floor, hiding my face from her view. I couldn't let her see the satisfaction in my eyes, knowing she had driven my husband away. "My name is Linda. I'm a 23-year-old housewife living with my husband, Donald. I was born into a farming family where all the nearby houses were the same. I grew up helping my parents in the fields. Though our income was small, we could eat fresh vegetables and fruits from our own farm. After graduating high school, I got a clerical job at a nearby company. I was the youngest female employee, which may be why my husband, Donald, who I met at a company party, was immediately taken with me. We quickly started dating and soon got married. Donald was big, noticeable, cheerful, and loud. Popular with everyone around him, I was drawn to his manly and supportive demeanor. Despite our short dating period, I accepted his proposal. I left my job and relied on him for support. Even with only a high school diploma, I aimed to build a career and needed to keep working after getting married. However, my husband held traditional views and opposed the idea of me working. It's a man's job to provide for his wife and children. In return, your job is to manage my earnings well and give birth to healthy children. Remember that, my husband said, as if teaching a child. Though my dream of a career was gone, I adapted and decided to live the life he wanted. I thought that a quiet life as a housewife wasn't so bad. My husband took the lead for us, and I humbly managed the home. It might have been a bit old-fashioned, but we were doing well. The pressure to have children was even stronger for my mother-in-law than for my husband. Farmers have no education or business sense, they just grow plants relying on the weather. A girl from such a family must only be good for bearing children. Understand? You must have healthy children as soon as possible. Of course they should be boys. Got it. You need to have at least 3, she said at our pre-wedding meeting. My mother-in-law made me sit on a hard floor without a cushion while she reclined on a sofa. I didn't resist her demands because I also wanted to have children early and focus on raising them. However, it hurt to see my beloved parents and people from my hometown belittled. My mother-in-law runs a restaurant originally started by my father-in-law. It became a popular diner, always full during peak hours with local patrons. After my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law took over, and my husband works there too. I remember the beefsteak set meal I had when I first visited. It was greasy and strongly flavored, but the main customers were male manual laborers. As time passed, months and then half a year, the atmosphere at home grew darker. I hadn't gotten pregnant as we had hoped. My husband and I were in our 20s and had frequent marital relations. I worked hard to make my body more conducive to pregnancy with stretches and a special diet. My mother-in-law visited weekly, yelling, "Still no grandchildren? Don't you understand your role as a wife? We don't need a lazy woman who just eats up her husband's earnings." Being much younger than my mother-in-law, I couldn't talk back and just hung my head, muttering, "I'm sorry. It's because you're daydreaming. You need to have a strong desire for a baby every time you're with your husband at night. If you have that strong will, you'll get pregnant soon," she continued. I ignored my mother-in-law's shallow, theorized advice. Besides stretches and diet, I was doing everything I could, like running for fitness and managing my basal body temperature. But I knew explaining this to my mother-in-law would be pointless. As for my husband, who was also working hard on getting me pregnant, I thought he would defend me when his mother berated me, but that wasn't the case. "I'm right. I come home tired from work and still work hard on making a baby," my husband said, watching a baseball game on TV. "It's been 6 months since we started trying right after our wedding. You should have gotten pregnant by now. You must just be lazing around at home. It must be nicer," he laughed crudely. Who was it that made me quit my job? I had told him I was spending my daytime on housework, exercise, and studies for our baby plans, but had he forgotten? Given the atmosphere, our marital time was strained. Previously, my husband used to tell me fun stories from work and friends that made me laugh a lot. But now there was barely any conversation at the dinner table. His effort in our baby plans became half-hearted. Being treated roughly, both physically and emotionally, pricked my heart. I had consulted my parents over the phone several times. Their response, in a good way, was carefree. Children are a gift. There's no need to rush. Not wanting to worry my cheerful mother, I couldn't bring myself to go into more detail. Then a few more months later, my mother-in-law finally snapped. A year into our marriage and still no baby, she visited our house, grabbed my hair at the entrance, and screamed, "You useless woman. Defective female, we didn't take you in just to defeat you for nothing." I managed to close the door to keep her shouting from being heard outside, but she kept pulling me around. "I'm sorry, but I've been eating nutritious food, exercising, and trying my best to get pregnant," I said. "Don't give me excuses," she screamed, eyes blazing, and swung her handbag at my face. The gilded metal decorations hit near my eye, making me cry out, "Ouch!" "Not being pregnant is all the proof I need. Those are just excuses to eat good food and have fun. You pig of a wife." Her hysterical voice was piercingly loud. I sat down, holding my face where the metal had hit. Unable to stand up, my husband wasn't home, so my mother-in-law attacked me one-sidedly. After a barrage of insults, she barged into the house, rummaged through the kitchen and dining room, nitpicked at my housekeeping, and left. This time, her words genuinely hurt me. I was still young and confused about why I couldn't get pregnant despite regular health checkups and cycles. I hadn't lost my desire to conceive. I was just as troubled by my inability to get pregnant. Being completely denigrated and called a pig was too much. I cried silently until my husband came home that night. I suggested infertility treatment to my husband. "I think there's a reason we can't conceive despite our efforts. My family will help with the money so you won't have to bear much of the burden. Please, will you cooperate?" My husband made a bitter face. "Infertility treatment, huh? I just don't like it. There will be all sorts of tests and drugs, and people will meddle with us. That's not how it's supposed to be. Pregnancy is supposed to be natural." His old-fashioned and baseless beliefs were clear. Whether we use drugs or not, it's still our baby. If the treatment works, your mother will be relieved too. I know you're working hard at your job and trying for a baby. Please, I'm begging you, I pleaded with him, always respectful. After about half an hour, he reluctantly agreed. Then I had a similar conversation with my mother-in-law, who finally allowed me to go to the infertility clinic. "Let's see if the doctor can prove you're a brainless pig," she said. I made an appointment for a few weeks later, and the day came quickly. We explained the situation to the doctor and underwent various tests. We left the hospital with bitter expressions. An awkward atmosphere hung between us. The tests revealed that my husband was the one with a low sperm count. What had all my efforts and insults from my mother-in-law been for? Yet I felt relieved that nothing was wrong with my body. I hoped my husband would now be more cooperative with the treatment. We were supposed to report the results to my mother-in-law immediately, so we headed to her house. I wondered how my husband would explain that the issue was on his side, feeling anxious next to him. But to my surprise, he said, "It turns out Linda's body has problems. She's not easily able to conceive." He lied with a straight face. "Wait a minute." I widened my eyes in surprise and tried to correct him. But before I could say anything, I felt a sharp push on my back. Of course, my mother-in-law took his words at face value and looked at me with eyes full of contempt. "See, the doctor confirmed you're nothing but trash who can't fulfill your duties as a wife. Please listen to me. The diagnosis is, don't talk back. How could you not be ashamed of failing to bear your husband's child?" She cut me off, screaming hysterically, "Well, we know the cause now, and we'll start infertility treatment." "Don't worry, Mom." My husband mixed truth with lies. Even after hearing this, my mother-in-law didn't calm down. Inside, holding her head, she said, "Honestly, using other people's help to have a child is disgraceful. What will the neighbors think? I can't stand the idea of a grandchild made with strange drugs and chemicals. It's disgusting." Her generation had strong prejudices against infertility treatments. Unlike my husband, who denied it based on old-fashioned beliefs, my mother-in-law expressed her disgust outright. "I get it. I also believe that a naturally conceived child is the real deal, but it can't be helped now. Even a child conceived through treatment will be ours, so they can be their heir." In a way that seemed to muddle things, my husband managed to settle the situation. Unable to oppose her own son any further, my mother-in-law reluctantly agreed to the plan of fixing my supposed issues and pursuing treatment. On the way home, I couldn't shake off the lie and asked my husband, "Hey, why didn't you tell the truth about the test results?" He looked at me with disdain. "Stupid. How could I say it? It's embarrassing to admit that the problem is with me. Mom would be disappointed. Don't you get it?" It seemed he wanted me to understand the family dynamics, but he couldn't grasp how hurtful his lie was to me. "Listen, you better not say a word. Just pretend it's your problem. It'll keep things smooth." I had no idea what he meant by smooth, but I decided not to argue. In any case, the chances of getting pregnant naturally were slim. Feeling deflated, I asked my husband a few days later if I could work part-time. I had lost the motivation to stay home, focusing solely on housework and baby making, and wanted to engage with the outside world. "Well, since you can't get pregnant, it's better than you lying around at home," he replied nonchalantly while reading the sports section. Who was the one who had me quit my job, claiming he would support me? But I got his permission, so I decided to work part-time at a nearby supermarket. I was hired quickly and praised for my talent of being quick to learn. I got along well with my colleagues and made friends from older than me to my age. It seemed that the stress of staying home and obsessing over pregnancy was more than I realized. Meeting people outside made me happy and lifted my spirits. One day, while having tea with friends from my part-time job, my phone rang. Rarely receiving calls, I was surprised. "Excuse me," I said to my friends, checking the screen to see that it was my mother-in-law calling. "You're late to answer." As soon as I pressed the call button, my mother-in-law's angry voice came through the receiver. "I'm sorry, I'm out at the moment," I said. "Out? You can't get pregnant and you're out. What are you thinking?" "I'm really sorry. I'm relying on Donald. Is there something wrong?" Whether she thought I was rushing her or just wanted to vent her anger, my mother-in-law immediately continued shouting over the phone. "It's not something, you idiot. Get over here right now and help out at the store." I knew the store was always bustling, but I had never been summoned like this before. Maybe someone called in sick. Anyway, I had to go since she called. If I refused, who knows what she'd say next? "All right, I'll be there soon," I said. After demanding I arrived within 5 minutes, she abruptly hung up the phone. I explained the situation to my friends and rushed to my in-law's store. My friends expressed concern and offered kind words as I hurried off. When I arrived at the busy store, my mother-in-law scolded me for being late and made me work hard until closing time. The abuse continued harshly. I had many questions as I was unfamiliar with the tasks, but she either ignored me or yelled when I spoke. She swapped the order slips I had correctly taken, making it look like I made mistakes. She intentionally spilled hot food on me in the kitchen. My husband, working at the same store, saw this treatment numerous times but never intervened or even spoke up. Feeling ignored, I was overwhelmed and filled with sadness. Each time after closing, I was made to clean until late at night. "Don't leave until the entire place is spotless, and you better come every day from opening time," she commanded. My husband had already left, but I had a part-time job during the day. When I began, she threw a package at me with a furious expression. Luckily, it missed, hitting the wall instead and scattering supplies and condiment bottles across the floor. "What part-time job? That's just a pastime for a little girl. We're fighting to keep this store alive," she said. Her intimidating manner left me unable to resist further. If I didn't show up the next day, I feared what might happen. After she left, I quickly called my part-time job to explain I couldn't work for a while due to family circumstances. The manager was disappointed and worried, and I felt truly sorry. I also felt sad about not being able to see the friends I had made there. When I got home, I told my husband about what happened. "Your mother told me to help out at the store every day from now on. I had to take a break from my part-time job. Are we really that short-staffed?" My husband replied nonchalantly while watching sports news on TV. "Huh, short-staffed. What do you mean? No one's particularly taken days off or sick." "Really? Your mother said we're short-staffed and fighting to keep the store going, so I have to help as the daughter-in-law." My husband tilted his head in confusion, repeating that it couldn't be true. Could it be that my mother-in-law was summoning me to the store just to bully me? Come to think of it, under the guise of helping family, it was nothing but unpaid labor. I don't mind helping out, but she bullies me in places the customers can't see. You saw it yourself today. It makes me really sad when these things keep happening. Can you subtly help if you see something? "Well, the store is busy and Mom might get a bit harsh when she's rushing through work," he replied, completely missing the gravity of the situation. Feeling neglected, my heart ached. "It's not like that. She deliberately gives the wrong orders and yells at me for the mistakes. She spills hot food on my clothes. It's really awful. Please, I know you're busy and always working hard. Just help when you can, even if it's just a little." I looked up at him with tears in my eyes. As a man who liked to lead and protect, he would be weak to this expression. Suppressing my real stress and pain, I acted like a hurt puppy. As expected, my husband softened a bit, his expression becoming gentler. "All right, I'll help if things get tough for you." "Really? Promise me," I said, exaggerating my joy and gripping his hand. I hated my own powerlessness. Pretending to be weak was the only way to protect myself. Maybe I deserved to be called a silly little girl. Such thoughts showed how broken I had become. Still, I had to find something I could do, no matter how small. Even if I couldn't change my current situation, there had to be something useful for my future. The next day, my mother-in-law yelled, "You were too slow, you pig." She threw cooking utilities at me in the kitchen. I had come in early and endured her constant harassment since morning. Despite promising to protect me, my husband saw the ladle hit me and turned away, leaving the scene as if he hadn't seen anything. He never really supported me and betrayed me time and again. I was deeply disappointed in him. Still, I wanted to work diligently at the store. I cleaned in the morning, helped with prep work, and served customers politely. Yet my mother-in-law, while claiming the work was vital for our livelihood, continued to sabotage me. She overturned a bucket of water in front of me as I cleaned and blamed me, shouting, "What are you going to do? We don't have time before opening, you useless girl." While I served a customer, she tricked me from behind. The food spilled all over the floor and the dishes shattered. I fell, dirty and ruining my clothes in front of the customers. She apologized humbly but then dragged me to the back, yelling, "What were you thinking, clumsy girl?" She tricked me so slyly that no one noticed the truth. "I can't stand just looking at you," my mother-in-law muttered in the kitchen, away from the customer's eyes. Even though she forced me to take time off from my part-time job to come here, what was she saying? Both mother and son changed their words depending on their mood and were so irresponsible. "It's all because you can't have a grandchild for me," my mother-in-law shouted, slamming the frying pan she had on high heat onto the counter with a loud bang. Of course, the misunderstanding had not been cleared up. "It's all your fault we have fewer customers today. My makeup isn't going well. The price of flour went up. Everything is your fault," she ranted irrationally. I focused desperately on my task of serving the food despite her words. The restaurant was quite busy, and I had to deliver the meals quickly and accurately. "Hey, are you listening?" I turned to her, looking down, and said, "I'm sorry. I need to deliver the food, so let's talk later." At that moment, my mother-in-law stepped forward and slapped my cheek with the hand that had been holding the hot frying pan. "You just talked back to me, didn't you?" she said. Holding back the pain in my cheek, I shook my head and tightened my grip so the food in my hands remained safe. She then used the same hand to cover my mouth. "Listen, a woman who can't get pregnant has no right to speak." Her monstrous expression was terrifying. Still, I couldn't stop working, so I nodded to appease her. She released my mouth, and I gasped for air as I tried to regain my composure and deliver the food. She brought something from the back of the kitchen. It was a heavy staff-like stick used for supplies. "No way," I thought, freezing in fear. The next moment she swung the stick with all her might. "This stomach is the problem," she screamed, hitting my stomach with the stick. The sound of it slicing through the air and the dull thud as it struck me echoed. "Ouch, ouch, it hurts." An unimaginable dull pain spread through my body. "This useless belly, this defective belly." She struck me not once but twice, 3 times. I lost my balance, falling onto my backside. The food I was holding spilled onto the floor. "Get out, you useless girl who can't bear a child. Go back to the countryside." After the 4th and 5th blows, she dropped the stick, laughed scornfully, stepped on me once, and went out to the dining area. It hurt. It was unbearable. My head was pounding from the shock of the blows, and I felt dizzy. The greasy smell of the spilled food on the floor made me nauseous. I felt something snap inside me. I'd reached my limit. I couldn't stay another second with my mother-in-law, who resorted to violence, or with my husband, who turned a blind eye to her attacks on me. It's not even my fault that we can't have children. It's my husband's. I somehow managed to get my shaky body up. Peeking through the door to the dining area, I saw my mother-in-law chatting happily with a regular customer. Trying to avoid making any noise, I quietly entered the staff room, quickly grabbed my valuables, and then rushed to the restroom. It wasn't to rest my beaten body. There was a window in the restroom that opened to the outside. I opened it wide, climbed onto the toilet, and escaped through the window. The cool outside air wrapped around me. It felt incredibly liberating, and I shed quiet tears. Then I ran straight to the station. I had silently fled from the diner where my mother-in-law and husband were working. I was headed to my parents' house without a bag and with my clothes stained from the food. I rode the train for about an hour, aware of the curious stares from other passengers. Fortunately, no one reported me, and I arrived at my parents' house shortly later, ringing the doorbell frantically. Of course, my mother was shocked to see me in such a state. When she opened the door, she asked, "Linda, what happened? And why are you dressed like that?" I was not only in my worn clothes, but they were greasy and messy. My hair was disheveled, and my cheek was swollen. Holding only my wallet and phone, my mother quickly realized this wasn't a normal visit. She hurriedly let me in, got me into the shower, and gave me a change of clothes. After that, I told her everything that had happened to me, how my mother-in-law had continuously insulted me for not having children, how a fertility test revealed the issue was on my husband's side, but he lied about it in front of his mother, how my husband never defended me and let my mother-in-law do as she pleased, how I was summoned to the store and repeatedly hit in the stomach. I sobbed as I recounted everything. My father was also there, and both of them listened attentively. How horrible! Hurting a young woman's body with a stick is just insane. It was my mother who cried out in anger, trembling with tears in her eyes. She got up, rushed to me, and hugged me tightly. "You've been through so much pain. You endured so much for so long. You've done well." As my mother cried, her warmth brought me a sense of relief, and I too started to cry out loud. All the emotions I had suppressed, the things I had resigned myself to accept, the times I had killed my feelings just to get by, all these things turned into tears and poured out. At 23, young and fragile, it was only through this experience that I realized the emotional pain I had endured. It's not right to lie about your own health. If you respect your parents, you should never lie and ignore Linda while she's being insulted, my mother said. I won't forgive such a man. My father, now openly furious, said this as he looked at my mother and me, both still sobbing and hugging each other. Although my father is an old-fashioned man who despises dishonesty and often preaches about being straightforward and sincere, for him, my husband's behavior was intolerable. "If you told me sooner, I would have marched over there myself," he said, his clenched fist shaking with anger. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to trouble you and Mom with our problems. I can't just sit here. This is unbearable." With his breath coming in harsh bursts, my father paced around the house. Meanwhile, my mother prepared food and a bed for me. During these few hours, my phone had filled with over 100 missed calls and voice messages, all from my husband or mother-in-law. They must have noticed my absence, panicked, and called incessantly. In anger and frustration, I didn't want to hear their voices anymore. I wanted to ignore everything, but I gathered my courage and played a few messages in front of my parents. "Where the hell are you? You think you can just leave our store like that? Running away through the bathroom window, you sneak pig. No matter how many times you try to escape, I'll drag you back until you get pregnant with a male heir." Hearing their abusive words made me nauseous. I crouched down, holding my mouth. My parents quickly crouched beside me, patting my back. Using such filthy language, my mother said, "I didn't want you to hear that. You'll never go back to that house. We'll handle a divorce through a lawyer." My mother comforted me while my father expressed his anger. After that, I had my first home-cooked meal in a long time and slept in a warm bed. There was no pressure about getting pregnant, no husband who wouldn't listen, and no mother-in-law's insults. When was the last time I felt this at ease? I finally slept soundly for the first time in a while. The next day, my mother took me to the hospital, just in case. She was worried about any internal damage from my mother-in-law's assault. Fortunately, neither the gynecologist nor the internist found anything wrong. Of course, there was still a possibility of future pregnancies. I had a minor sprain from the fall, so I only needed some ointment from the orthopedist. My mother said I should focus on resting my mind and body first. Following her advice, I spent my time relaxing. 3 days passed in this peaceful manner. One day, while I was at my parents' house, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Thinking it might be a delivery, my mother went to the door. I followed her out of curiosity. As soon as she opened the door, I gasped. There stood my mother-in-law and husband, two people I never wanted to see again, but something was clearly wrong with them. They looked too drained and pale to be filled with anger. "You must be Linda's husband and mother-in-law. What do you want with us now?" my mother said sternly, her expression hardening. To our surprise, the two of them collapsed to their knees, hands on the floor, and begged me, "Please, we need Linda to come back. If she doesn't, we can't keep the business running. Please." My husband trembled, and my mother-in-law pleaded with tears in her eyes. Their desperation shocked and confused my mother and me. "We have no intention of sending our daughter back to you." "What is going on?" My mother stood firmly before them. Then a voice came from inside the house. I told them what happened. It was my father, slowly walking down the hallway. I couldn't forgive what they did to Linda, so I told the nearby farmers about it. "You might not know this, but everyone around here supplies vegetables to your restaurant. When they heard how you treated my daughter, they were furious. They all stopped supplying you with vegetables and eggs. Without stock, you can't open your store, and now you're here trying to get Linda back to fix everything." My father walked firmly down the hallway, and my mother and I moved aside for him. He stood tall in front of my husband and mother-in-law, who both looked down and clenched their teeth, unable to say anything. There was no denying my father's words. "Please come back home. We can't do anything about the children now. Mother won't act like before. Please, we'll lose our regular customers if this keeps up. We want a grandchild, but now we can't even survive." They continued to beg and cry, standing in the doorway. My mother responded firmly, "It's too late for empty apologies. I will never forgive you for hurting my daughter, both physically and mentally. And all you're talking about is yourselves. My daughter did what you told her and went back to the countryside. You need to figure out your own lives from here on out." My father supported her. Seeing this, I took the opportunity to ask what had been on my mind. "What happened to your face?" I asked. My mother-in-law glared at me, but my husband answered. "She fell down the stairs while trying to cling to the farmers from the second floor to the first. She landed on her face. It could have been much worse." My parents and I remained silent, not knowing how to respond to such a ridiculous story. But then my husband's coarse voice broke the silence. "Look, my mother got hurt trying to save our store. Don't you get it? That restaurant was built by my father and run by our family. Linda, if you come back, the farmers will understand," he shouted as he stepped toward me and grabbed my arm forcefully. As he tried to pull me, my father grabbed his arm and yanked it away. "Don't touch my daughter." My husband hesitated for a moment, then he retorted, "You can't talk to me like that. We promise not to be mean anymore." Father and husband glared at each other, ready to fight at any moment. I took out my phone from my pocket and switched to the voice recorder screen, showing it to my husband. The screen displayed the date and time when I was hit in the stomach and ran away. "Please leave and file for divorce. I've recorded everything from that time with this phone. I can probably sue you," I spoke calmly. My mother-in-law's face turned even redder as she raised her voice. "Sue us? That's too much." "No, I'm serious. If you don't divorce me, I will sue you. And I should finally tell you that the infertility issue isn't mine. He was diagnosed with a lack of active sperm." I finally revealed the truth about our infertility. I regretted not speaking up sooner and siding with his lies out of fear. As soon as I spoke, my mother-in-law shrieked, "What? You're saying it's my son's fault? That's a lie, you brainless pig. You hate me so much you'd lie about this." My parents wouldn't stay silent. "Did you just call her a pig? You're calling our daughter a brainless pig. There's no way we're letting her go back to you." Despite my parents' intimidation, my mother-in-law continued to lash out. "Of course she's from a poor farming family with no education or talent. Her only value is her youth, and she can't even have kids. She's nothing but a pig that eats and sleeps." Her insults were unbearable. I turned away silently, heading back to my room. Behind me, I could hear my parents' angry voices arguing with her. I didn't go back to my room just to escape the argument. I took out the diagnosis paper from the hospital from my drawer and returned to the entrance with it. I handed the document to the four of them who were still arguing. Seeing it would reveal the truth to my mother-in-law and expose my husband's lies, she read the diagnosis in silence. When she finished, she sighed deeply and stared silently at my husband, disappointment clouding her eyes. "You liar, ungrateful child," she said, her trembling voice the only sound in the now silent room. A few weeks later, with my parents' help, I successfully divorced my husband through a lawyer. Now I spend my days helping with my parents' farm and studying for a certification to return to work. My parents were kind and took care of my well-being every day. What happened to my husband and mother-in-law? They eventually left our house looking ashamed, saying nothing. At the same time as the divorce proceedings, my mother-in-law was questioned for assault. My father insisted on suing, unable to bear it anymore. A few months later, we were able to claim about $4,000 in damages through the lawyer. My mother-in-law complained that it was too much since their business was struggling, but the recordings on my phone of her yelling and hitting me were undeniable evidence. With everything resolved, I enjoyed peaceful days again, but then something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, and when I answered it, there stood my ex-husband, pale as a sheet. The scene from the day he and my mother-in-law tried to take me back flashed through my mind as I tried to close the door silently. He cried out in a tearful voice, "Hey, don't close the door." "Wait, you blocked my calls, so I had to come here." "What do you mean you had to come? We're divorced. We have nothing to do with each other anymore." As I tried to shut the door, my ex-husband knelt down just like that day and looked up at me pleadingly. "I want you to remarry me, please. I won't let my mother say or do anything. I just can't do this alone anymore." Coincidentally, my parents weren't home at the moment. Wary of what might happen, I decided to hear him out while discreetly turning on the recording function on my phone in my pocket. He explained that once his parents found out he couldn't impregnate a woman, he had gone on a spree sleeping with numerous women. In the process, he contracted a serious illness and spread it to several of his partners, who were now suing him. His savings quickly dwindled due to medical bills and compensation payments. He wanted to remarry me to get financial help. The story was so disgusting it made me feel nauseous. I must have looked at him with utter contempt. "Even if we're divorced, I'm still your ex-wife. Please help me out." "Why would I? You're a liar, heartless, and thoughtless. Divorcing you was the best decision I ever made. Don't come here again. If you do, I'll call the police." As I coldly declared this, he looked at me with eyes full of despair. A man who never listened to his wife, who was a mama's boy, a liar, a womanizer, broke, and now sick. I wondered what would become of his life. But honestly, I didn't care. I pushed him out and shut the door, locking it firmly. Later, my father heard from nearby farmers that my mother-in-law had managed to recover from her facial injuries and reopen the restaurant. However, the farmers continued to boycott her, forcing her to buy supplies from a local supermarket. The difference in quality compared to fresh farm produce was obvious, and customers gradually stopped coming, even the regulars. About a year later, the restaurant finally went out of business. With no income, she still had to pay compensation and needed money for living expenses. Ironically, she now worked long hours at the very supermarket she had used for supplies. My ex-husband's illness worsened, and he struggled with low-paying jobs while battling his condition. His health deteriorated due to the strenuous night shifts, and he was overwhelmed with multiple compensation payments and debts. Meanwhile, I successfully passed my certification exam and was rehired by my former company. Still young and now more skilled, they valued my experience despite the gap. I was praised for my quick and thorough work, and my former colleagues were delighted to have me back. I quickly made friends with new employees and found my days much more enjoyable. I planned to use my earnings to treat my parents to good meals and take them on trips a few times a year. Then, a few months into dating, a man from the same company proposed. He was quiet but earnest, always considering my feelings first, a genuinely compassionate person. We soon met each other's families, and his parents were kind and welcoming. I felt confident we would get along well. My new life was beginning. There might be tough days ahead, but with loved ones by my side, I knew I could face anything. With sincerity, honesty, and a caring heart.